Good morning, everybody. It's been said that good ideas start with brainstorming and great ideas start with coffee. We're here to talk about great ideas, innovation, hot topics, and more with fascinating guests in the world of cardiology, medicine, healthcare, and beyond. I'm Dipti Itchhaporia, President of the American College of Cardiology, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our virtual coffee table. We look forward to an interactive session today and have allotted the last half for open discussion with questions and answers from all of you. Also, we want to invite you to follow along on Twitter using the hashtag ACC Coffee Table. A reminder for virtual engagement, please remain muted when not speaking, and we encourage the use of WebEx chat feature. At the end, we hope that you'll join us for the question period, and if called upon, please have your camera ready so we can chat with you. So without further ado, I want to introduce my fascinating guests for today. I'm joined by Maddie Musselman and Chris Fussell. Maddie is a two-time Olympic gold medalist in women's water polo. She won in Rio in 2016 and Tokyo in 2020. She's also she's a three-time world champion. She was named MVP of the 2020 Olympic Games and previously named MVP of the World Championship in 2017, and World League Superfinal in both 2019 and 2021. Maddie is a student athlete at UCLA studying physiologic science. She redshirted the 2019 to 2022 and the 2020 to 2021 calendar years due to COVID and to train for the Tokyo Olympics. And she'll graduate this coming spring of 2022. Maddie not only has dreams of excelling in sports, but loves the field of medicine and has her eyes set on a medical school and becoming a physician. We hope maybe she'll choose cardiology. So welcome, Maddie.
Thank you for having me.
So then my second guest is Chris Fussell, who serves as the president of the McChrystal Group. And he had a 2015 New York Times bestseller called Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World, as well as a 2017 Wall Street Journal bestseller called One Mission, How Leaders Build a Team of Teams. He spent 15 years in the military on the U.S. Naval SEAL team, leading the SEAL elements in combat around the globe. Chris is a senior fellow for national security at New America, Washington, D.C., based nonpartisan think tank dedicated to understanding the next generation of challenges facing the United States. Welcome, Chris. So we're going to get started. I'm going to start off with Maddie. You know, this is really great. First of all, thank you both for joining us. I really am interested in this whole concept of team building because, as you know, in medicine, we've really evolved and moved into this team concept. So it's great we're going to get a perspective from a sports person and a military perspective and see if there's some commonalities. So Maddie, tell me about what it's like to be part of a winning team. What does it take? What did you learn? Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, well, so just so everyone knows, I joined the national team at 15 years old. So I was super, super young and kind of thrown into a space of really high standards, a lot of expectations, and honestly a lot of pressure to kind of know who you were. And I honestly didn't really know that many values of what I thought was important as an athlete, or what it took to step up and communicate in a space where people are trying to be on the highest level of their sport. And they had success in 2012 where they won a gold medal, and we had 4 returners come back to that team, and communication was the number one part of our team, and what went into building trust, not being complacent, being able to kind of bounce back after something didn't go the way we expected. And we openly talked about, like, the first day I joined the team, we openly talked about what we were good at and what we were not good at. And me being 15, I was like, I'm not good at anything. Like, I'm not good at, being able to talk in front of a group. I was like an extroverted introvert. I didn't know anyone. And our coach sat us down in a circle and was, talk about your strengths and talk about your weaknesses. And from right then and there, I actually grew a lot of confidence in being able to speak to girls who I, was a little bit intimidated by, and just to kind of get that confidence and that strength to be like, this is a space that I want to be in. I want to be an Olympian, and just being able to just say it out loud and make that communication, a part of our culture was really huge. And that kind of bled into the 2020 quad. We had 7 or 8 returners from the 2016 Olympic team. And so the communication there was really fluid. There was a lot of trust that came with it. We went on a 7-day silent retreat in September of 2019. And it was really interesting. Obviously, no communication. This is where our team was, we excelled in being able to talk to each other, and that was stripped. You're kind of by ourselves working on mindfulness and relied on verbal or nonverbal communication, which in water polo sometimes that happens. And it was really interesting to be able to not talk to someone who's right next to you. Being in your head, what are you going to do on a bad day? What are you going to do on a really good day? And for us, that built a lot of trust. We were only allowed to talk to each other an hour each day. Everyone was talking. And usually it's people who have a lot of experience that are really comfortable with speaking. 3-time Olympians, 2-time Olympians, all the first-timers are usually really quiet. But, this space kind of was everyone had to talk. Everyone had this hour to be oh my gosh, this is the only time I can speak. And you just realize how important that communication is when it's stripped away from you. And I think also just, we've had a lot of success with our women's water polo team, winning back-to-back now. And the huge part is, how can we not be complacent? How do we keep that success going? And something that's really special about our team, and probably what will lead to hopefully more success, is the authenticity of the group. You don't have to be a particular way or have the same exact values to be on this team. You have to be able to talk about it, say what's important to you, and ultimately that will lead to being able to have that trust. And when things don't go well, when you fail, being able to bounce back and be resilient. And you have to be humble. Usually when people win, and you can get this really high, standard of I'm always going to win, but that's not the case. You can lose any day, and you have to be prepared to be able to handle that. And it's kind of ironic. We did a day with Navy SEALs, and we had to carry logs, which at first are not heavy at all. And ultimately we had to rely on communication, and also, being able to say what you're good at and what you're not good at, so that you can line up in the right spot on the log. And a lot of people were scared to say what they weren't good at. And I think especially in the world of medicine, or maybe in the military, you have to kind of be vulnerable at times so that you can learn and that people can help you. You're not alone. And I think there's a stigma around, being the strong person all the time. And sometimes being vulnerable actually makes you stronger. And I think that's what makes our team really, really special.
So there's a lot of things I can think about to ask Chris at the second, but I want to just stay on this for a second. So Maddie, you said 2 important things. One is you really had to learn to communicate. And as you guys communicated, you built trust that helped you to be a part of that winning team. What about who's in charge? Tell me about the structure of that team. Because you said in the past, there's really nobody that was a captain of this.
Yeah, so one thing that I love about the national team, and one thing I love about my college team, is there are no captains. Everyone is just as important as the person next to you. And I think something that does separate the structure is experience. We have 3-time Olympians who've been to the Olympics before and are able to share that with first-timers. Obviously, we have our coach who leads us and actually gives us a lot of freedom as athletes to be professional and to take charge. Obviously, he guides us and gives us the right tools and resources, but ultimately, anyone on any given day has to be ready to play. And we train at any moment. I could be in for the last minute of a game, and it comes down to me scoring or getting a stop on defense. And we train like that. We have that mentality. And when someone joins a team, for example, when I joined at 15 and I told myself I'm not good at anything, all of my teammates looked at me and go, no, you're good at something. You just need to find it. And you need to find the strength to say it. And yeah, maybe you don't have the confidence right now, but we're going to help you get there. And these people were 2-time Olympians. And I'm like, you're telling me I haven't done anything yet. I literally just showed up. I maybe won a high school championship, and that's about it. and they're telling me that I'm special and that I deserve to be here. And that just created that equality of, I can make a difference whether I'm at the same level or not, but I can get there, and I will be respected if I put in the work and I'm not complacent and I'm open to communicate about it. And that started from the first day I got there, and it's still to this day. And I hope I can carry that into the 2024 Olympics as I train and help the new people.
We're going to be rooting for you, Maddie. So, Chris,
Thank you.
You've heard what Maddie said about, the fact that they thought communication was really important, trust building. I know you've said that before. I've heard you speak before. Talk to us about, from a military perspective, what is the part, like when you were part of the special forces, the teams, the Navy SEAL team, what were the elements of that successful team?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having Maddie and I both on today. For starters, because Maddie brought it up, I want to see if I can pull this image up really quick. I'm totally going off script here, but is that coming through? It was a big deal when the women's polo team came out and went through a day of training out in the SEAL teams. That might be Maddie in there somewhere. So when she's talking about,
I'm right behind that log right there. It's blurry, but that's my face. I look really happy.
that's you second on the right, yeah. Yeah, so it's a great, if you ever want a team building exercise, put 6 people under a telephone pole and watch what happens. But it's an important point around sort of the core essence of creating a team-oriented feel. And Maddie said it several times, the idea of trust, right? And that's, if you ask anybody what makes a great team, 85% of the room, the first thing out of their mouth will be trust. So it's sort of intuitively obvious to us as human beings, and that comes back to the tribal nature that we all have. We're all, more reactive to fear than reactive to positive opportunity, right? And so, point being, we're often walking around looking for hazards, and whether that's in your business life, on an athletic field or on a battlefield, when you are surrounded by people that you trust, that fear reaction goes down, right? And so we want to develop that naturally for survival. And in intense environments like sports or the military, it becomes all that much more important, or in healthcare, in an operating room, in how you're running a hospital, whatever the case may be. And so we knew that sort of intuitively, and that's been the origin of the special operations was, going back generations. I've got this big, huge military thing. I can move it around and it can do a lot of stuff, but it's by design, it's meant to be structured and bureaucratic and slower than one person on horseback, right? So I need some other units that can go and react to those strange little problems. So I'm going to specialize teams. They're going to be smaller, faster, more specially equipped. They can't do the big, massive stuff like the large army can. But in order to do that, I have to train and select a certain type of person and then imbue that small team with things like trust. They have to understand one another in a deeper way at a very personal relationship level than I need inside the big military. And that's oversimplifying it. But so a lot of over the last 40 years, there's been a deeper understanding of training approaches, the way that teams at that level work together, the amount of time they spend together. They will be in the same unit for years, a small team unit. And we knew intuitively that's so they can develop this sense of trust. Now, fast forwarding to the last 20 years, where the world's got much more complex for special operations, that idea of trust has been taken to an even deeper level. So even now in the corporate space, a lot of the work we do starts there to look at measurements of trust inside of small teams or all the way up inside a large company. And you can break that down into sub-variables, which we would argue, based on my experience there and what we see in other spaces, trust can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But I think the key drivers are, do I trust you as a person, right? Have we spent enough time together that I know you've got my back, so to speak? I always look at that as the kid test. Will you trust this person to watch your kids, right? So that's like deep emotional trust. Then do I trust your capability? Are you good at what you say you're good at? right? And that sort of Maddie's point of coming onto a team as a young player, other senior players would intuitively trust that capability level, right? You wouldn't be here if you weren't good. So let's get past that and start working on the other stuff. And then third is dependability. Will you be on time for practice? When you send me something, do I know you've done your homework, right? And so if you find those three metrics in place, and you can do that on a napkin with looking at your own teams. Do we trust each other as people? Do we trust the capability level amongst ourselves, and are we dependable? And it helps leaders think through, we're good at two of these, but we don't see each other as dependable. Or everybody knows we're good, we're very dependable, we don't know each other. So let's go on a rafting trip, or let's go on a silent retreat. So it allows you to refine that level of trust that's so key in supporting the effectiveness of a small team. And so that's one of the many learnings that's taken place in special operations over the last 20 years, is really refining and honing in on how you create trust at that team level.
So Chris, talk to me about the concept of what Maddie said, that there's no team captain, but clearly in the military, there's a hierarchy. There's certainly a hierarchy in medicine. And some of that we're trying to change, I think with the small teams and stuff. Tell me about the concept of that. Does there need to be a leader? Or is that a good thing, a bad thing? Or what's the right approach? Because there's this struggle in medicine talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's, as a consultant, I can answer everything with it depends. So it depends. But interestingly, most organizations, the military certainly, finds themselves in this situation of sort of big structured bureaucratic systems interacting with much more decentralized network problems, right? So you could explain the last 20 years on the battlefield through this lens right here. We had this great post-World War II sort of national security apparatus connected in with allies. You can scale it up, you can train it, you can move it around the world. Very, very effective. Really good at traditional nation-state conflict, right? We won the Cold War through this model right here. Our system was just more efficient, cost-effective, reliable, et cetera. But the Soviets were doing the same thing. They had a very similar structure as to ours. But then in the information age, we find ourselves facing not only traditional structured problems, but also networks that can form and grow and evolve in a totally different way. Networks aren't new, obviously, but in the last 30 or 40 years, the connectedness that we all share, what we're doing right now, allows us to pass ideas and form coalitions, cohesive networks globally at light speed. And so this thing over here can grow and maneuver at a rate that the other big system can't. So each one has its strengths and weaknesses, right? This one is huge and efficient, but slow and kind of painful sometimes. This one is fast and agile, but hard to control, and it thinks for itself, right? So there's no leader over here. There's an ideology, an idea set, a belief, and it's dependent on the strength of that belief to keep these relationships strong. This system over here is dependent on a rule book, and it's very structured, right? And so when they interact with each other, things tend to go really, really poorly for both systems. Actually, this one is never going to beat this one, but this one takes a lot of damage when this one shows up, right? So, and we've seen that play out in real time around the world over the last decade or so. So one of the ways that special operations comes into play is forming these small specialized units that are attached to this. But when you look at the structure inside a SEAL team, on paper, it looks like this. So to your point, there is a leader, there's a team captain, there's a lieutenant that's in charge of those 20 operators, whatever the case may be. But in reality, when they go into this fray over here, this reforms itself into something that looks like this, right? It becomes a network, high performance team model. There's no single person. And that's because when it meets this problem here head on, this problem here is very dynamic and will change the second that SEAL platoon shows up. So you're not fighting some sort of static problem. And so this has to be able to adapt just as quickly. So it goes into a state of sort of decentralized flow where suddenly the junior most person, they're closest to the most high risk threat, and they can take action immediately without running down the line and asking somebody for permission, because by that time the problem's gotten worse. So that's how they'll react in the moment over here. But when they come back into the system here, who's going to brief to the colonel and the general what happened? Probably the lieutenant and the senior non-commissioned officer, right? So that leadership structure comes back into place. That said, when there are things that only the junior most person will understand because they were the one closest to that particular issue, they're certainly welcome and pulled into that higher level discussion. So special operations has learned to get into a state of flow where does structure help you and advance the mission, and where does it hinder you and slow you down, and how do we find the balance between those two? And it's challenging. I always tell people, if you can run your whole world through a system that looks just like this, you should do it, because it's a lot easier. It's very easy to control and just give people orders and tell them what to do, but it doesn't work very well in the modern world.
So what Maddie was seeing is more the other model, right? The network model, because it's, right? That's what she was saying.
That's right.
But let me ask both of you this question. So one of the things that you both said was developing those relationships and communication. That's really important. But that all takes a lot of time. You know, when you're forming a team in the hospital or something, sometimes you don't have the time to form those kinds of relationships. You don't have, and now you even mentioned, Chris, the phone, right? That's a good way to communicate. Is that good? Is the digital format of communicating enough, or does it have to be face-to-face contact to develop that trust?
Maddie, why don't you go?
I mean, I think both. I mean, for water polo, I redshirted at college to spend an entire year with my team. I moved closer to the pool so that I could fully commit myself to this process. And if you want to be committed to your work, if you want to be the best at what you do, and this is from my perspective at least, is you'll give all of your time. Obviously, we all have lives outside of what we do. We have families and we have friends, but there's a certain amount of time that goes into what you want to accomplish. And I'm a really big planner and organizer and scheduler, and I'll find time for all of it, and it's possible. And we don't do everything to build this team and a winning team just by being at the pool together. Like I said, we went on a silent retreat. We did Navy SEALs. We would go to dinner. We would call each other at night to make sure that it wasn't just, someone wasn't having a good day, just like checking in, making sure they're okay. And it's bigger than just water polo. It's bigger than just medicine. It's bigger than just being in the military. And it depends how much you want to commit to it and how much you want to put yourself into building those relationships so that when it comes down to making a decision, you have that trust that's a little bit more and a little bit deeper than, oh, they're good at water polo and, they can score the ball. And that's what makes our team really special. And, when we travel abroad, I look at other teams sometimes that don't have that trust or that connection. And it just makes me super, super thankful to be on the team that I'm on, because every single person, when they show up to work, they're fully committed. And even if they're not, the accountability and kind of like what Chris was saying, being dependable is always there. And if it's not, we'll make sure that person gets right back on board. And that comes from the time that it takes. And it's not easy. It's a sacrifice, of course. Like I dropped out of high school. I had to go to online school to be fully committed. I left my school at college and I did it for 2 years in a row. It's not an easy decision to make. But like I said, if you have goals, if you want to save lives, if you want to, be the best player in the world or be the best team in the world, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to commit? And it's a lot to ask, but you can see the results come as you make more and more commitments and as you trust more and more. And that takes time, but you have to be willing to do it.
Chris, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say that things do move faster, but to Maddie's point, whether it's long-term deliberate planning to create those relationships or short hits, you've got to do it if you're going to have an effect. Show me a high-performance team that doesn't have something like that, and you'll blow my mind, right? They all do, right? There's this great scene in Miracle on Ice where the coach goes to the goalie. I think Jim Craig was the goalie, and he's given a psych test to everybody on the team, and the goalie refuses to take it, and the movie captures that scene, and the goalie says to the coach, "Are you mad that I didn't take your test?" And the coach says, no, you told me all I needed to know when you decided not to take it, right? So you have to take time to understand the psychology of people on your team and figure ways to put in corrective measures. We're not all going to show up as the perfect teammate, right? And so as a team leader or as a coach or wherever you fall in that structure, understanding those multiple dynamics that create the trust base inside of a team is important, because otherwise you're just sort of barking at people to get along.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that at least in the last decade, we've sort of come to realize in medicine that it's not just the clinical skill, right? It's not the skill set that you have either in the field or in a sport, but that it's the non-clinical, the non-clinical skills that you have, and that's what you guys are talking about, taking that extra time for interactivity. So you can be a great surgeon, but does that necessarily mean you're a great leader? No, because those are some other skill sets.
And you can, just to build on that, because I think it's so important for medicine. There's lots of studies out there, but I give you a small example of if we were doing this in a big conference room right now with, tables of 6 times 10, right? So there's people scattered all around. Nobody really knows each other. Just grab a seat in the conference room. If you, before everything got started, if you walked up to one table and said, I want you all to do something really quick for me, and you had them do a 30-second little drill. Everybody, take your water glass and put it on the person's head next to you and see if you can balance it. Something silly. And they don't have to introduce themselves. They don't do anything else. You sit down and you start thinking. If somebody pulls a fire drill 20 minutes into Maddie's talk, the likelihood of that table taking most charge in the room is exponential, because they have some sort of emotional bond. You've planted it. They don't realize it's happened, but they will be more team-oriented than the other tables all around the room.
So this brings up another, and this is a little bit off topic, but it's not, because we're in now this world where COVID, we haven't had the time to be together, right? So even within the ACC, we have committees, we have people that need to work together. But guess what? We can't come together because of the travel restrictions. And then potentially, I think the world has changed. We may not be able to come together as much as we can in person. So what does that mean? How are we going to get that connection when we can't meet in person? Chris, I'm going to ask you that.
Yeah, I'll start first. The special operations world started from Vietnam until 2001 was all about, here's the headquarters for this team, this element, and it's going to have 4 subunits inside of it. And so every day you're sort of going to work and you're living together and training together. And then post 2000, so that physical team orientation was important. Post 2001, we had to run all around the world to chase our adversary, right? So those small teams were suddenly isolated from one another. And so we went to this very rudimentary, but remote digital communications became the norm. And the idea of digital leadership got thrown out very early on. Our senior leaders talking to the leaders of our elements saying, this is how we're going to maintain ourselves as a cohesive tribe through video and remote communications. There's no other choice. And so we've got to learn to get very comfortable with it and good at it and leverage it. And so in some ways, it actually advanced us, because what that sort of normal physical presence, trickle down, go to a meeting in this room, go to a meeting in that room, there's some real strength to that, as we were talking about earlier. But when that was taken out, we pivoted to a 24-hour cycle. Is very aggressive in that world, but communication rhythm, 7 days a week for many years on end. And every day would start with sort of a morning sync, call it. And it started with the top 50 people, but fast forward 2 or 3 years, there would be 7,000 to 8,000 people a day dialed in on that one single platform. Wow. On video, listening, talking, chat rooms going on the side, sort of like a morning catch-up. I'm oversimplifying it, but there was structure to it. What are the key priorities for the day? What's going on in this part of the world versus this part of the world? What are we learning? So there was a lot of that, but there was also an emotional connection that came out of it. As crazy as your world was, in some corner of the fight in a remote part of the world, you knew if you dialed in at 06 East Coast time, you were going to see 6,000 other people that were in the fight. You'd listen to some updates. You'd see some friendly faces. You'd have a chat room with somebody back in DC that you hadn't seen in a while. and it gave you that sort of emotional connection back to the big mission.
So what you're saying is that if you're going to only be able to digitally connect, create some extra venues within that digital space to have some social connection or personal connection. That's what you're saying.
Yep.
Right? So Maddie, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I think it's different for my sport because we have to be together. And we were very lucky to all live in the same area. It's obviously a little bit different when you're coming from all over the country or even outside of the country. But even just during COVID for us, we had Zoom meetings, we took the time to make sure we were staying connected as much as possible. But we were very fortunate to actually be together the entire Olympic year after quarantining for a couple months. So not as much connection there, but it's a little bit more required when it's a sport or at least a team sport, because you got to build that physical connection as well.
So I have some questions in the chat box, and I'm going to open it up in about a minute. But I just wanted to ask Chris, I had seen a video of yours recently, and you mentioned that in particular in this pandemic world, that if you were a leader, you needed to connect with your team and let them know the purpose of what they were doing. And you needed to do that more consistently, regularly, to remind them, because they were all remote. Can you, I thought that was a great message. Can you sort of maybe reiterate that message for everybody?
Sure. It's one of the things that we take for granted when we have that physical proximity is, as a leader, you can call your top 10 deputies into the conference room, have a meeting. It can be maybe a little bit sloppy. You're having a bad morning. That's not great, but it happens. But you've got 10 other people. 8 of them are probably really focused on the day. And so when the meeting ends, they can go, and as you walk out, they're like, I think that this is what the boss is saying. They clean up the message that trickles down to their teams. So you can get away with more. It's not, I would encourage it, but you can get away with a little more sloppiness and clarity, because you have the hallway and the follow-on meetings and the lunchroom and all the other things that come together for the cohesion to happen and the message to get cleaned up. So when we go to a digital environment, you don't have that, right? As soon as we hit our red X, we're not going to see each other, right? And so you have to be exceptionally precise as a leader in those virtual environments, because you have that one shot. And if there's just uncertainty when a meeting comes to an end, it's only going to get worse as it trickles through all the follow-on emails and chat rooms, because no one's in the hallway. I'm just going to ping Maddie directly and say, what was she talking about? I don't understand it. Maybe Maddie's unclear too. And now both our teams are going to go in different directions, and there's no second opportunity or third opportunity inside the building to clean it up. So the clarity and precision in a remote environment is critical.
Well, there's a lot more we can talk about, the three of us. I wanted to hear a little bit about leadership from both of you, but let's see if we can hit some of the questions, and maybe I can ask some of the leadership questions as they come along. I'm going to ask Thad Waits to get on camera, and then followed by Joe Marine, because they both had questions. So Thad?
Yes, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, yes. So in the medical world, we even have seminars about the disruptive position. And I wonder, in your teams, and the SEAL team especially, that could be deadly to have a disruptive person on the team during a mission. And I'm sure during a match, Maddie, it'd be the same way. So how does the team handle the occasionally disruptive person?
Maddie, I'll start. There's a lot of similarities. Interesting. It's a great question. The likelihood of that type of personality being dangerous in the field is exceptionally low, right? You get that high performance, but do we want to really deal with their problems? They're given credit because they're so good at the job. Like this person should have been a Viking, and they happen to be around now, right? So you definitely want them with you when you're in the field, but there's a lot of negatives that can come downstream in peacetime or when you're not out operating. And so the question for leaders is always, how much cultural disruption and risk am I willing to accept from this person? What's the gain of having that operator in the field versus what they might do when we're all back in the team room? And is it infectious? Can I get them back online? And look, there's a decent percentage of the special operations community, just like in high-end athletics, that have that outlier personality they're so incredibly good, but they're not naturally oriented to be team players. And so how do I pull them into the fold? Because the benefits I can get from them on the court or on the battlefield are so high. The hard call for leaders is to say, I just can't justify the benefits in the field versus the risk when we're not out operating.
Thank you. So
Yeah, I think it's very similar in the sports world as well, in terms of we all have a lot of different viewpoints when it comes to making a team, especially in water polo. We all came from different backgrounds, different areas, and there's always at least like one person that might not agree with what's happening. And this is where that communication piece is so important, is, you know, lay it out on the table and then we can work with it, and kind of creating strategies of, you know, being adaptable. You know, there's obviously certain people that might think that this is going to go a certain way or it has to be this way. But if you're not open-minded to actually gearing a different way, then it's going to be really, really hard to work together. And, you know, that's definitely happened on teams that I've been on where, you know, we have a disruptive member who, you know, maybe doesn't think that something that's happening is okay, but actually it's what's best for the team. And that's where those standards and those, you know, those like laying out your goals and meeting as a team and knowing what you want to accomplish, so that when someone goes off path, you can kind of bring them right back on. And that piece of it can be challenging at times, without accountability to be able to, you know, give someone criticism and not take it sensitively is a huge piece of kind of building that team and that communication, that two-way street. It can't just be like, oh, this person isn't doing it right, I'm going to yell at them. And then there's no conversation about it. It's just, oh, I feel attacked and we're not going to talk about it. It's just, oh, they yelled at me, I'm just going to put it in the back piece of, you know, my toolbox. I'm never going to touch it again. And after a while, it builds, and that tension, you can feel it. You don't really know why, but at some point it will erupt, and, you know, the team dynamic gets thrown off a little bit. So that communication, that two-way street is really huge when it comes to someone that might not be on the right path.
thanks, Matt, for your question. Go ahead, Chris.
To add on that, one of the key points, and it sounds like Maddie's been on teams that have done this, it works well in the military, works well in the corporate space. Having teams early on align on what's the goal for the season, what's the goal for this unit, what's the goal for this deployment, whatever it is, and have that as a calm conversation. Okay, we want to accomplish X. What do we all commit to get there? We're never going to miss a training cycle. We're never going to miss a practice. We're never going to be late. We're going to be honest with our teammates, whatever it is. Like, here are our 10 driving principles. Frame them, put them on the wall, and it makes those follow-on conversations, because you know someone's going to break them. You know, most of us break one a week, right? And you figure it out and try to get better. It's the great performer that's breaking 3 a day that you can then sit down and say, hey, look, you came up with these, right? You're part of this commitment. Every time you break 3 of them and then go out and do really well in the field, it makes the rest of the team wonder why they're working so hard to live up to the principles we all agreed on. So things like that can really, really be effective.
Yeah, I love the principles concept. We've done that for different groups in the past that I've done, where everybody agrees to it. It's on the wall, and when people start breaking it, you can point to that. So I love that idea. Joe Marine, you had a question.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for all your terrific insights. Kind of a related question. How do you handle the person on your team who's not disruptive enough, who's not performing up to their potential? What are your thoughts about that and comments?
So Maddie, what do you think? If it's an underperforming team member, what do you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, especially someone who's like super competitive, and, you know, you come into a space where you're trying to make a roster. You know, when someone isn't performing to the level that's, you know, the standard is, you know, show up every day, you know, on time is late, and it becomes like a repetitive thing, you almost, like, even as a teammate, like, the trust, you doubt it a little bit, and you're like, well, why are you here? What's your fire? Like, why are you here? Is there a goal? And yeah, we have team goals. You know, like I just said, you know, you have the standards of the team, but there's also personal goals, and being able to keep each other accountable for what the person next to you wants to do is huge when there's, you know, someone that's maybe not trying as hard, or, you know, today's not my day. But you can't have those days when you want to be the best in the world. And I think, like I said, you can't be sensitive to the criticism that you receive, especially at the Olympic level when you're trying to perform. And it can be hard, especially coming from me, who's like a little bit more introverted. I'm not the one who usually like wants to address an issue, but if you want to be the best, you kind of have to put yourself in that space. And it's coming from a place of, I respect you. Like, you're obviously here for a reason. How can we make this better? How can we all be better? And making it more of like, I'm not attacking you. I'm just, we can all be better. And how can we be more open-minded to the work ethic that you're putting in, and making sure that it's a consistent effort that's coming every single day. And it's easy to lose that sometimes when you see the same people every day. You're like, oh, they won't notice today. You know, like, there's 15 of us on a team. I can lay low today. But there's always someone right next to you that's like, come on, like, you can't lay off today. If, you know, you want to be the best, let's go. And just having a team, teams are huge. I don't know if I would be able to do an individual sport. I love teams too much. And that, you know, reliability and dependability, like Chris talked about, is huge. You know, being able to rely on, hey, I might show up today and I know I'm not going to have a good day, but I know someone's going to say something, and so I'm going to have a good day. And just giving the 100% of 60% if that's what your day entails.
Yeah, Joe, just building on that a little bit. It's a great question. I think it's actually, and this is very debatable, I think it's a little bit easier at the really high performance team level, at SEAL teams, you know, where Maddie's been in her life, because you can always default to a leader as, hey, you're not only doing a disservice to your teammates, but there's 100 people that would like to be in your position who have worked their whole lives to get there. And so if you're not going to live up to the standards of what it means to be on this team, then do them a favor and give them a shot, right? Which is sort of it's very true at that level. I mean, there's how many people that would have liked to have been the 15-year-old playing on the world water polo team. I think when you get down into the more normal world, which is where most of us now spend our time, it gets a little bit harder because there's not 1,000 people that want to be in there. I think talking through sort of narratives and stories in normal times as a leader, trying to demonstrate to folks what that means to you and why it's so important, is a great way to sort of build that into your culture. There's a shortened version of a story I share often. I grew up wrestling, and I remember as a young high school wrestler meeting a guy who went on to be a really successful wrestler at Penn State. But at that point, he wasn't in the starting lineup, and he was talking through his sort of daily routine, which was incredibly disciplined. I remember somebody asking him, like, you're not even in the starting lineup. Why would you be up at 5 a.m. and make sure you're in bed at 9 o'clock at night? And he said, oh, because the guy I'm training with has a chance to win the national this year. And so his role was to make sure that guy was ready for that. It's like, if I'm not in bed by 9 p.m., I'm not ready to train him as hard as he needs to be trained, because in 2 years, somebody's going to do the same thing for me. And for me, that was like the first time of realizing what it truly means to be a dedicated teammate for something bigger than yourself.
Right. I have another question and I don't know the individual, it just says MAC 2015. It said wanting to ask a question about the Ryder Cup. So can you identify yourself and ask that question? Somebody that wanted to ask a question about the Ryder Cup and hockey.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay,
I think the Ryder Cup is a great example of individual goals and team goals. Chris mentioned hockey. I was fortunate to go to the Ryder Cup 3 years ago. It's on right now. And it's interesting that Patrick Cantlay a few weeks ago was putting for $15 million at the end of an event, and now he's a team member. And it's amazing to me to watch these golfers and how they adapt to the team concept going from an individual sport. Chris, you mentioned hockey. To me, hockey builds itself because of respect. I think the way that hockey players greet each other at the end of, in the National Hockey League, at the end of the playoffs, and they shake hands, but in youth hockey, they do the same at the end of every game. And that teaches people a lot about what their team is and how they look at the other team. Maybe comment on those principles.
Maddie,
Go ahead, Chris. He kind of asked you.
Yeah. Yeah, so if the question is around pivoting from sort of the individual aspect to the team aspect, and how that takes place. Yeah, I think it's most high performance team players could also have been. I think there's a combination of skills there, right? I'm willing to bet that Maddie Silverman in a different lifetime is Maddie Musselman, sorry, is a Olympic caliber cross country runner, right? So, which is totally individual sport. I know plenty of guys that I wrestled with in individual sport that could have been great team sport oriented, right? So I think there's a combination between those two, and the best high performance teams have a nice blend of those. But it's also important to know who here is driven as an individual, and sometimes they'll be that outlier personality, and who is by team-oriented person that I'm more willing to give up some of the individual skill set. There's a great book, I'll think of the name and throw it in the chat room, about, it's called Captains, I think. I'll throw it in the chat. It's about the importance of having a team captain inside of a high-performance team, who oftentimes, and there's great historical case studies throughout the book, are not the best player by stats, but they have that some sort of magic charisma that allows those individuals to come together as a team. They hold those principles on the wall. They imbue those far more than their capability on the court or on the field. And so I think the blend of those two and having the right dynamics to pull them all together into a cohesive team is critical.
There is a question from Ibrahim, and I think we sort of dealt with it, but Ibrahim, if you want to ask, but it's about uncooperative members. But I sort of feel like we kind of addressed that with the other questions about the members, but do you want to ask that question still? Okay. All right. So I don't know if he's still on. There's a question. I'm trying to see who this is. Murdola. It's about the issue of the age. Can that person come on?
Yes, I just wanted, so in general, my experience is from the teams that I've seen, the sports teams, they relatively come together at a younger age, especially if you're going to Olympic player or so, the discipline or the team building exercise starts at a younger age. I don't know about special operations, what's the age that they get into, so I don't know. But in terms of the medical teams, you don't necessarily be able to pick all the team members at all. You are joining a team that's pre-existing. Do you think inherently that carries disadvantage? Because medical schools don't offer, at least most medical schools that I know of, the students that I speak to, it is not the team building exercise or leadership skills that are offered. Most of the time, medical schools train them to become individual competent physicians, but not to become team leaders or how to build a team or function in a team with different backgrounds who you have never known before.
Yeah, I read your question in the chat earlier, and I actually thought it was a really great question because, yeah, we, for at least water polo, we joined at a really young age, but it doesn't mean all our personalities were the same. And even in the medical space and like what you're kind of talking about, those like leadership skills, this is why this talk is so great, because we can all be open to being better and open to change. It doesn't have to be the same way all of the time. And, you're talking about, coming from different backgrounds, being different doctors, learning to be a strong, independent, physician, and being confident in what you do. But why can't we also be really open-minded to being able to work together in that space? And this is also a huge reason why I would love to work in medicine and, bring that leadership and those skills into the medical field. And I think it's possible. And as you just talking about it and bringing that question up, like, you can be a spark that starts that conversation. And that, yeah, we might not always agree. You might be in a different work field or a different area that might not always be compatible, but why not just start that conversation? And you'll see where it leads. And yeah, maybe you don't always agree, you might not always line up, but like we talked about, like communication is such a huge part of connection, and being adaptable. You can have beliefs, you can be really strong in those, but it doesn't mean you can't learn, you can't be better. And just because you might be older or super young, and think you don't know anything, there's so much to be learned at any age. And I've had teammates that are a lot older, in the 30s, that I've played with when I was 18, and they were like, yeah, I know what I value, but I can always be better. And that mindset is so important in any field that you'll work in.
So Chris, what do you think? I mean, I think I inherently understand the question in the sense that, yeah, that some of the team members are older. I mean, this isn't like they didn't come in thinking they were going to be part of a team. So how do you mold somebody that's older and set in their ways?
Yeah, it's one of the challenges with, an understandable challenge in the healthcare space, is, teams come together quickly, and then it might be the only time some of them are ever in the operating room together, for example. I'm over my skis there, but as opposed to special operations where you'll join at an older age, early 22, I think 23 is probably the average graduation age for SEAL selection. But then you're reforming teams throughout your career, right? And so the norms and standards of how you create that team, if that becomes sort of a general practice, then it's not surprising when people say, and this is why we were talking a bit earlier before everyone joined around aviation, right? After some major, some of the worst aviation tragedies in the history of that industry took place in the mid to late 20th century, there were major changes on how we train a cockpit to work together. And just little practices of sitting down, introducing one another. Is this the first time on this aircraft? Who's done this route before? Just so you get to know a little bit about one another. And then emphasizing the hierarchy inside the cockpit. There's a classic case study in one of our books we wrote years ago about a crash when a plane was running out of fuel, and the two co-pilots knew it was running out of fuel. And on the black box, you can hear them saying multiple times, I don't think we're going to make the runway. I don't think we're going to make the runway. And the captain was obsessed with the fact that one of the landing gear wheels was stuck at like 45 degrees, which would have been a bad crash and ruined a plane, but it wouldn't have killed anybody. And so the captain was hyper-focused on troubleshooting this wheel as they were circling and running out of fuel. And then they just ran out of fuel and crashed into the woods. And all but, just a few folks were killed. And it was this wake-up moment to say, it's not enough just to have this structure in place. We actually have to think through, how do we create a team out of this group of people that may have never worked together. Some of you that travel a lot will know that the odds of when you're on a cross-country flight that whole crew has worked together more than that leg they flew back and forth from New York to San Francisco is pretty low. It's often a bunch of strangers that we're putting our lives into their hands. And so they have put in place structures to create a team-oriented feel right out of the gates, right? So it can be small, it can be big, like you would find in special operations or on an Olympic team, like where Maddie's been, but having that as part of your standard doctrine is critical.
Great. So we have another great question. Ketan Vada, if you can come on and ask your question.
Yes. So my question revolves around the concern when.
Can we see you on camera? Can you turn your camera on?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, my question revolves. Just give me a second. Sorry, my phone is not cooperating.
Okay, good.
All right. So, yeah, my question.
Okay, we lost you when we got the camera, so maybe I can ask the question since it's in the chat.
Do you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, all right. So my question revolves around.
Okay, I think we lost him. So let me just say, his question was that he said sometimes we have a cooperative member, but with a busy schedule, and it's hard to keep the motivation up. How do you recommend increasing medical team motivation? I guess any team, how do you keep them motivated is the bottom line question. When people are busy, particularly, how do you keep them all motivated to do that? And I think that was what I was kind of getting at, Chris, earlier when I asked you that question about how do you connect with people? So maybe you could start with that and then.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a sense, like at the corporate level. I'm way more interested in what Maddie would say, because that keeping a team focused, having grown up an athlete, nowhere near that level, but it's always when you need to be in the best shape and most focused when you're most sick of the sport and your teammates, right? And so it's getting through that final playoffs or end of season stuff that matters. At the corporate level, I mean, obviously in the healthcare space, this has been crazy for the last 2 years. Some of this will sound sort of bumper stickerish, but it actually is critical. Leaders connecting regularly, like using whatever is at your fingertips, video, however you're going to connect with your teams. If you can do it in person, great. And demonstrating like an understanding and empathy, being honest about what you don't know, your levels of uncertainty. Traditional systems will tell us as leaders or shape our behavior such that we sort of cover up what we don't know, and we hide behind strategic planning and all these other big things. When things are moving fast and chaotic like they have been over the last 2 years, for many of the folks on this call, leaders that just say honestly, like, look, we have no idea where this is going to land. We should know more within 10 days. Between now and then, let's just fight it as a team. Getting on a more aggressive cadence. When we have the hallway to play with, we can sort of lazily resync every Monday morning and do a quarterly strategy review. When things are disaggregated and we're physically separated and changing very quickly, that should be a daily cadence, and it's very easy in today's world to do that. And then really trying to put yourself in the position of folks on your team and saying, look, I think I get what you're saying. It makes total sense. But our number one reason for being together as a team is X. And as we talked about earlier, constantly reinforcing not just the strategy, but why you exist in the first place. And, I think no one in the world would question the healthcare industry right now and the importance of the mission you have all been carrying out. That doesn't mean it's easy for people to come into the emergency room again after another wave and deal with the same problems they were dealing with a year and a half ago. So it's really challenging on leaders, but I think it's communication and empathy are the key points.
What do you think, Maddie? How do you keep the team motivated?
Yeah, it's a very individualistic, but also team dynamic type of situation for me personally, at least when I think about it. Like when I think about when I'm unmotivated, it seems like it's always a personal battle. But in all reality, there's also so many other people on your team that are probably experiencing the same thing. And, it's a grind. It's a grind to do what we all do. When you put so much time and effort into it, that sometimes it becomes so narrow focused onto what you're doing in that moment. For example, for me, it could be like a swim set that like we get and I'm like, I don't think I can do it today. And one of the best parts of, like I said many, many times about being a part of a team is there's so many people that can pull you out of that really like narrow-minded focus that kind of brings you back to your own mindset of why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And it's not easy. It's always a huge challenge to kind of take a step back and remember that, it's such an honor to represent your country and to play this sport, when you started at a young age and, what it sparked to be in the military or why it sparked you to be a doctor. And that's not always easy to see in the moment. But the reliability and the dependability to be next to someone who can kind of get you there is really, really huge. And it's hard in a space that's super competitive and, sometimes you don't really want to help the person next to you because you're competing against that person and it can kind of be a little bit full of tension, but that's where that respect and the trust kind of comes into play is I really care about you. You don't have to love the person and, it's not always the easiest relationship, but you really respect them to the point where you really want to help them. And when someone's struggling to be motivated, it's really easy to look to the person next to you and be like, hey, I need help. And I think it's hard to do that all the time, but in a space where it's day in and day out and you're sometimes doing the exact same thing as you did the day before or the week before, you kind of have to remember why you're doing it. And maybe that doesn't come from within all the time. It comes from the person next to you. And this is the importance of like finding something that helps you release those tensions. It could be writing stuff down. It could be just talking to someone. It could be so many different areas that you can kind of dive into that get you remotivated. And in the sports world, there's so many different places that you can find that. And I can only imagine that there's also so many places you can do that in the hospital or in the medical field, but also, you know, in the military and with the Navy SEALs. It's a grind. It's scary. I did it for one day and maybe 2 hours, and I was like, I don't know if I could do this. But you look around, you're inspired. It's inspiring. And, you know, when you're surrounded by people that are really committed to a goal, but also committed to who they are, it makes it easier to find that motivation when you're kind of down in the dumps sometimes.
Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I mean, certainly I could talk to both of you for a much longer time, but I really want to thank both Maddie Musselman and Chris Fussell for joining us today around our virtual ACC coffee table. So the recordings of these sessions are on the ACC YouTube page, typically a few days after the event. And don't forget, we're having a special session next Saturday in conjunction with our ACC Legislative Conference, where we'll be talking to Senator Bill Cassidy and Congressman Ami Bera, both of whom have been physicians that have turned to politics. And join us for that on October 2nd at 10 a.m. Find out more on acc.org, ACC Coffee Table. And I'm going to end with a toast with my guest, my special guest. So may your coffee be strong. May your day be full. May we help, may we heal, and may we advance heart care worldwide together. Thank you so much all for stopping by, and thank you to my guests.